Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 8 true disturbing stories from Tennessee. These are tales of people who ventured into state parks, backcountry trails, forgotten cabins, and low, quiet hollows and found something they were never meant to see. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. Fall Creek Falls always felt too beautiful to be dangerous. That's the first thing I need to say, because if you've been there, you know what I mean. The overlooks are almost showy about it, like the park wants to make sure you leave impressed. The rock faces drop away into all that green. The water throws mist up through the gorge, and even the parking lots have that clean, organized feeling that tricks you into thinking the woods are somehow under control. My sister used to joke that state parks were just wilderness with office hours. I was there in late October, I think, maybe the first week of November. It had turned cold enough that my coffee tasted metallic out of the travel mug, and I remember being annoyed that one of my bootlaces kept coming loose no matter how hard I yanked it. I'd been putting off the trip for weeks because work was a mess and my apartment had one of those little problems that somehow makes you hate the whole place. My bathroom fan had started rattling every time I turned on the light, so I took a day off, booked one of the primitive sites, and told myself a night alone would reset me. I wasn't trying to prove anything, I just wanted quiet. The ranger at check-in was an older woman named Janice Hollowell. She had one of those flat, practical ways of talking that makes everything sound like useful advice. She told me a section of trail near my site had washed out from earlier rain, so if I heard any rock fall at night, not to panic. She said it the way someone mentions, where the extra napkins are kept. That should have stayed with me more than it did. By the time I hiked in, my shoulders already hurt from my pack riding wrong. I remember stupid details because that's how memory works when something bad happens. My socks had slid down inside my boots. I had a granola bar melted flat in a side pocket. My flashlight was sticky because a bottle of bug spray had leaked on it in August and I'd never cleaned it off. There was a red leaf plastered to the lid of the campground trash can, and I stood there looking at it for a second like I had nowhere to be. My site sat near a narrow spur trail that didn't appear on the park handout map. Not a real trail, exactly. More like a path that used to matter to somebody and didn't anymore. It sloped off between rhododendron thickets and disappeared downhill into the trees. I figured it was an old maintenance route or something hunters had worn in before the regulations changed. That was the first thing I told myself. I got camp set up before dark. Small tent, little stove, packet of instant noodles, folding chair, nothing dramatic. I even felt kind of embarrassed by how tense I'd been driving in because once the evening settled, everything seemed ordinary. Cold, sure, but ordinary. I could hear water somewhere below the ridge, and every so often a gust would move through the trees in a slow wave. A couple at another site laughed over something. I never saw them, just heard them, and for a while that helped. Then the woods got quiet in a way that didn't feel natural, not silent. I want to be clear about that. There were still insects, still branches moving, still the faint hiss of distant water, but it was like all the sounds had stepped backward, like the forest had made room around my campsite. I stopped stirring my noodles and listened. A minute later, I heard what sounded like someone walking up the spur trail. Steady steps, not crashing or stumbling, measured. I remember thinking it had to be another camper who'd gotten turned around. Maybe somebody cutting through, maybe a ranger. The steps kept coming, then stopped just short of the tree line where my lantern light didn't quite reach. I called out, "Hey," in that half-friendly, half-warning way you do when you're alone and not thrilled to find company. Nothing answered. I sat there another 30 seconds, maybe longer, trying not to feel stupid. Then I told myself it was a deer. Deer can sound more human than people realize when the ground's dry and they're picking their way through leaves. I believed that right up until I found the footprint. It was there the next morning in the gray dirt beside the little spur path. One print, deep enough to hold shape, human-looking except too narrow at the heel and strangely long through the toes, like the front of it had been pressed and dragged at the same time. There were no other prints around it, no approach, no exit. Just that one impression facing my tent. I crouched down over it so long my knees started aching. Then I laughed because what else do you do? I actually said out loud, "Okay, weird," as if that covered it. I spent most of that day hiking near the falls. I wanted people around me, though I don't think I admitted that to myself yet. I took pictures of the gorge, ate crackers in the parking lot, and bought a lemon moon pie from a vending machine, even though I don't really like them. By afternoon, I'd convinced myself the footprint had some easy explanation. Overlapping tracks, erosion, my own tired brain wanting a story. I got back near dusk and saw something hanging from one of the branches over my campsite. At first I thought it was trash snagged in the wind. A grocery bag maybe, but it wasn't moving. It hung perfectly still from a low limb about 7 feet up, pale against the darkening trees. It was the skin from a snake, turned inside out and tied in a knot. Not draped, tied. I stood there with my pack still on, staring at it. It wasn't fresh, dry and papery, long enough that the tail end brushed the air above my tent. I told myself some kid must have found it and messed around. That was ridiculous, even while I thought it. There hadn't been children anywhere near the primitive sites, and I knew with that prickling certainty you get before you can explain why that it hadn't been there when I left. I cut it down with my pocket knife and dropped it in the fire ring. I don't know why I did that. Anger, maybe, or some ugly little instinct to act like I still controlled the space. The woods answered with 3 knocks far off to my left, wood on wood, evenly spaced, then 3 more to my right. That was when I stopped trying to eat. Night came hard after that. The temperature dropped fast enough that I could see my breath in the lantern glow, and the dark beyond the campsite looked layered, almost solid. Around 8, or maybe a little later, I heard Janice Hollowell's voice from the spur trail. She said, "Sight check." Same tone, same flat, practical voice. For 1 second, I actually relaxed. Then I remembered the ranger station was over a mile away, and I hadn't seen any flashlight beam between the trees. I said, "Ma'am." No answer. Then from farther down the hill, in exactly the same voice, "Sight check." Not louder, not softer, just placed farther away like someone moving without the sound of movement. I didn't answer again. I clicked off my lantern and sat in the tent with my hand over my mouth, listening so hard my jaw hurt. I heard slow steps circling. The thing about a tent is it teaches you very quickly how imaginary your boundaries are. Nylon is not a wall. A zipper is not a lock. Every little sound becomes personal. A branch settling, a drip, fabric twitching in the cold. I kept waiting for those careful steps to pass and fade, but they stayed close. Too close. Once something brushed the rainfly lightly enough that I almost convinced myself it was a branch. There were no branches that low. Then came the sound I still hear sometimes when I'm trying to sleep. Breathing, not outside the tent, under it. Slow, damp inhalations from somewhere beneath my left shoulder, as if something had pressed its face to the ground sheet and was testing the air inside with me. I froze so hard my back cramped. I remember feeling the little ridges in the sleeping pad against my hip and thinking, absurdly, that I should have bought the thicker one. The breathing moved. It went from my left side to the foot of the tent without any sound of crawling, just one breath here, then the next down there. I had my flashlight in hand, thumb on the switch, but I couldn't make myself turn it on. Some part of me knew that if I saw whatever was under there, I'd lose whatever control I had left. Then the tent wall near my feet pushed inward. Only an inch, maybe 2, not a paw. Not a hand exactly. More like a knuckle pressing through fabric from the outside, sliding slowly upward. I hit the flashlight. For a split second, I saw it through the nylon. 5 thin lengths spread too wide apart, jointed wrong, each one bending halfway like fingers made of wire. The beam turned the tent wall into a pale screen, and behind it something lifted its head. I could see the outline of a face, but the eyes weren't dark spots the way they should have been. There were no sockets, just a smooth slant where the upper half of the face should have broken around them. That image still bothers me more than if it had looked human. I screamed then, no point pretending otherwise. I screamed and kicked at the shape with both feet. The thing folded backward, not stepping away, folding like it didn't need bones arranged the way ours are. I heard leaves crackle, then nothing. I didn't wait. I tore out of the tent with my boots half on, grabbed my keys and the flashlight, and ran for the main trail. I left the stove, the chair, most of my pack. I hit my shin on the fire ring and went down hard enough to skin both palms, but I got up and kept moving. Behind me, I could hear something pacing me through the brush, not crashing, just matching me. The main trail should have been easy to follow. I'd walked it twice. But in the dark, it felt wrong, narrower than before. Trees leaned where I didn't remember trees being. At one point, I shone the light ahead and caught a white shape standing between 2 trunks. It was tall, but not tall in a memorable way. The part I remember is the posture. Its arms hung forward instead of down, wrists loose, and its head turned as smooth as a weather vane toward the beam. Its mouth wasn't open yet. Then it split, not the face, the mouth itself. It opened upward through the cheeks, thin and neat, like a seam being unzipped too far. I saw small square teeth running almost to where ears should have been, though I don't think it had ears. Then it stepped sideways behind the tree without moving its shoulders first. That was the moment I nearly quit being a person and became an animal. I ran blind after that. I made it to the parking lot. I don't know how long later because the time between feels broken, minutes or an hour. My truck didn't start the first try, which I know sounds like every bad story, but there it is. Just coughed once and died. I could hear something tapping lightly on the metal sign by the trailhead, not frantic, patient. When the engine finally caught, I threw it into reverse so fast I nearly backed into the picnic shelter. I drove all the way to Sparta before I realized I was crying. I went back 2 days later with a ranger escort to retrieve my gear. I told them I'd had a bear scare and panicked. I couldn't bring myself to say anything else. Most of my stuff was where I'd left it. The tent was. It had been packed neatly into its bag and set upright beside the fire ring. There were 5 long dirt smears on the inside wall, from the floor up toward where my feet had been. I don't camp alone anymore. And when people tell me state parks feel safe because they're maintained, because there are maps and posted signs and little brown buildings with brochures, I just nod. I understand why they think that. I used to think it too. Story 2. Frozen head was my cousin's idea, which should tell you a lot right there. Eli Mercer had a gift for making bad plans sound like common sense. He was the kind of person who could slap the dashboard of a 20-year-old truck making a noise like loose dishes and say, "She's got another 100,000 in her." I loved him, but he had no respect for odds. This was in March, early spring, when the mountains still looked half asleep. The trees were bare up high, but the lower ground had started greening, and everything smelled like wet bark and cold mud. We'd grown up in Harriman, not far enough away to consider Frozen Head mysterious, just far enough that we'd each only done the easy day trails with family. Eli got it into his head that we should try one of the backcountry loops and stay overnight near an old trail shelter that wasn't in use anymore. Or maybe it was still in use seasonally. I don't remember. I just remember him grinning like he'd discovered hidden treasure on a map. I had a sandwich wrapped in wax paper in my pocket, a knee brace under my jeans because I'd tweaked my left leg playing softball 2 weekends earlier, and a headache from sleeping badly. My phone battery was already at 63% before we left the lot because I'd forgotten to charge it. Eli brought store-brand trail mix, 2 oranges, and exactly 1 pair of socks. He said socks were a scam. The trail climbed faster than I expected. It wasn't a pretty, leisurely walk. It was rooty and damp and mean in places, with long stretches where the trees closed so tightly it felt like we were moving through the inside of something. Around noon, we found the old shelter. It was three-sided, weathered gray roof sagging a little on one corner, with initials carved all over the support posts. Most of them were decades old. The ground inside was dry, though, and there was a stone fire ring nearby, so Eli declared it perfect. We spent the afternoon doing dumb little camp chores. He tried to teach me a card game I never understood. I picked burrs out of my sock. We argued about whether powdered chili smelled good or like dog food. At one point, Eli balanced an orange on the shelter railing and tried to knock it off with pine cones. He missed every throw. Normal stuff. That's what unsettles me now, how normal it all was right up until it was. The first strange thing was the voice. Not a spooky whisper, not some theatrical thing from the dark. It was just a man's voice behind the shelter saying very clearly, "You boys got room for one more." Eli looked at me and I looked at him, and for a second we both seemed relieved. Another hiker made sense. We passed no one all day, but that happens. Eli stepped around the corner and said, "Sure, if you don't mind a roof with opinions." Then he stopped. I heard him go quiet in a way that made my stomach tighten. I came up behind him and looked. Nobody was there, just trees, wet leaves, and a narrow drop where the slope fell away behind the shelter. No path, no bright jacket, no pack, no movement. Eli said, "Huh," but his voice came out thin. I remember trying to help the moment behave. I said maybe the sound traveled from lower down the trail, or maybe there was another shelter nearby. Mountains play tricks. Valleys throw voices around. I knew that. He knew that. We both nodded like that settled it. Then the same voice came from somewhere below us and said, "Appreciate it." That spoiled the explanation. We didn't leave, which I know was stupid, but leaving would have meant packing in a hurry and hiking rough ground in fading light, and there's always that part of you that wants to stay inside the world you understand. We told ourselves it was a prank, some jerk off trail, some local kid being weird. We made dinner. Neither of us ate much. As the light bled out of the mountain, the woods seemed to push closer around the shelter. I don't mean that poetically. I mean the dark between the trees looked unusually thick, like the spaces had filled in. Eli kept checking the slope below us. I kept pretending not to. Around full dark, something walked uphill. You could hear leaves dragging under the steps. Slow, careful, no flashlight, no panting, no muttered cursing the way a person climbing would sound. Just step, pull, step. Eli whispered, "If that's you from earlier, say something." A voice answered from the tree line on our left. Not the same place as the steps. It said, "Trying." The uphill movement continued from below. That was when I started to feel the fear physically, not as an idea. My hands turned stupid. You know what I mean? Clumsy. I dropped the spoon I was holding and couldn't seem to bend down and get it. Eli picked up a half-burned branch from the fire ring even though it had almost no flame left. The thing came into view 10 or 15 yards downslope. I only saw it in pieces at first because of the trees. A shoulder, a shin, one hand gripping a trunk. It looked like a man climbing toward us on all fours, except each limb moved independently, too loose and too thoughtful. When it reached the level ground, it straightened in stages, knees first, then hips. Then the upper body sort of stacked itself on top. It wore a jacket, an old green windbreaker with reflective piping, muddy at the elbows, zipped halfway up. Under the open collar there was skin, but it didn't sit right on the neck. It looked gathered there, like a shirt somebody had pulled too tight around a hanger. The face was turned down, hidden by the shadow of the hood. I think Eli said, "Sir," or maybe, "Hey." The thing lifted its head. Its face wasn't wrong all over. That would have been easier. Most of it looked almost ordinary in the firelight, nose, cheeks, even stubble along the jaw. The wrong part was the mouth. It was too high, not by an inch you'd notice in a passing glance, just enough that the distance between nose and upper lip vanished, leaving the mouth crammed under the nostrils like it had been pinned on in the wrong place. When it spoke, the lips moved late. Thought you had room. I felt my knee go weak, not from the old tweak, from seeing something I didn't have a place for. Eli backed up into the shelter wall. "Nope," he said, and I'll give him credit. Even scared out of his mind, he sounded almost conversational. "No, I think we're full." Then another voice answered from the darkness behind the shelter. Same voice. "That's all right." And another from farther up the trail. "That's all right." 3 of them. I never saw the others clearly. I saw outlines slipping between trunks, jacket sleeves, pale hands on bark. But I knew there was more than one because the first one in front of us smiled, and from the woods on both sides other smiles answered in the dark. Not faces, just pale mouth shapes floating wrong among the branches. That image is probably the worst thing I own in my head. Eli grabbed my arm and hissed, "Run on 3." I said, "What direction?" He said, "Any." We went right off the back side of the shelter instead of toward the trail. He crashed through brush ahead of me and I followed because there wasn't time to think better. Branches whipped my face. My bad knee almost folded twice. Behind us I heard movement everywhere, but not fast. That was the awful part. They weren't chasing like they needed to catch us immediately. They were just adjusting, drifting through the trees to where we might go. We slid down a muddy cut and ended up in a narrow drainage with water no deeper than my ankles. Eli said, "Stay in this," and for once he was exactly right. The creek bed gave us direction and made less noise than the leaves. We moved bent over, half stumbling, half wading, with our flashlights off, because every time we clicked them on we caught shapes ahead that shouldn't have been ahead. At one point I heard my own voice say, from maybe 20 feet upstream, "This way." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Eli heard it too, because he grabbed my jacket and shook his head without looking at me. That was the only time anything tried my voice. Eventually, the drainage widened and crossed under a service road through a concrete culvert. We crawled in there because we had no better idea. It was wet and smelled like minerals and dead leaves. Eli had to flat himself almost chest to stone because the top dipped lower in the middle. We stayed inside while footsteps moved overhead. Not boots. Bare impacts, soft and deliberate. Then from the mouth of the culvert, one of those voices said, perfectly calm, "You can come out. We found another shelter." Nobody laughed. Nobody broke character. That made it so much worse. I don't know how long we stayed hidden. Long enough that my legs cramped and the cold water in my boots stopped feeling like temperature and started feeling like pain. Sometime near dawn the sounds faded. Real birds started up, and the sky at the far end of the culvert went from black to dirty blue. We crawled out shaking and followed the road until we reached the parking area. Our truck was untouched. Inside, on the driver's seat, sat Eli's orange. He had left both oranges back at the shelter. I know that because I teased him about carrying fruit up a mountain like somebody's aunt on a day trip. One orange was on the seat. The peel had been opened in a single spiral strip and laid beside it like a curled ribbon. We never went back for the rest of our gear. Eli told people raccoons got into camp and spooked us. I told people my knee gave out and we bylaid early. That was years ago. He still won't camp in a shelter. I still don't like hearing voices in the woods when I can't place the body they belong to. And every now and then, if I'm in a grocery store, produce aisle and catch the smell of citrus, I think of pale mouths smiling from different directions at once. Story 3. Edgar Evans State Park has that lake country quiet that can fool you. Everything there seems softened, water instead of cliffs, coves instead of ravines. the kind of place where people rent cabins and take family photos in fleece vests. My aunt used to go there every fall with a church group, and for years I associated it with crock-pots and polite laughter and those little decorative pumpkins people put on porches and never actually use for anything. So when I got a call saying the old family cabin lease near Center Hill had lapsed and someone needed to clear out what was left before the structure got demolished, I said yes without thinking much about it. It wasn't even technically our cabin. My grandmother's brother, Vernon Pike, had rented it in the 70s and then sort of never fully gave it up. After he died, keys and boxes and old receipts kept floating through different branches of the family like nobody wanted to be the one to decide what mattered. I drove out there alone on a drizzly Thursday. I'm pretty sure it was Thursday. I'd taken my laptop because I foolishly thought I might answer emails from the porch if cell service cooperated. I brought 2 bologna sandwiches in a cooler, a yellow extension cord, a pair of gardening gloves, and one of those cinnamon rolls from a gas station that comes in hard plastic and always tastes faintly of refrigerator. The cabin itself sat off a service road on a rise above the water, half hidden by hemlocks. It was smaller than I remembered, and leaning more than any building should lean without embarrassment. Inside smelled like mouse nests, old coffee, and damp wood. The furniture was still there. So were the crocheted pot holders, the metal fan with a cracked blue base, and 6 coffee mugs that all somehow had chips in the rim. There was a deck of cards swollen from moisture and a stack of Reader's Digests from the early 90s. One bedroom had a closet full of fishing jackets. The other held nothing but a twin mattress and a lamp with no shade. It wasn't scary, just sad, a little stale, a little forgotten. I worked for a few hours, sorting what could be tossed and what I'd take back to my mother. Rain tapped on the roof. Every so often I heard something bump the underside of the cabin and assumed it was runoff shifting debris under the foundation. The structure sat on block piers with open crawl space underneath. Old cabins make sounds, wood swells, metal settles, squirrels move in. Around 3, I found a cardboard box under the kitchen table full of Polaroids, mostly fishing pictures, women in windbreakers holding stringers, little kids in life jackets. Then a few shots of the cabin itself. One of them showed the back deck from an angle that included the crawlspace access door hanging open. There was a person under the cabin, not posed, not centered, just there in the dark behind the blocks, half hidden, pale face turned toward the camera. I stared at that picture long enough to make myself angry. The most likely explanation was obvious. Some relative crouching under there as a joke, caught mid-movement. My Uncle Darryl would have done something like that, absolutely. I even flipped the photo over expecting a date or name, nothing on the back. I took the picture outside and held it against the cabin, trying to match the angle. The access door on the side was shut now, secured by a hook. I don't know why I walked over there. Maybe because once you notice something like that, your brain won't leave it alone. The hook was warm, not hot, just warmer than the wet air should have allowed. That bothered me more than the picture. I opened the access panel and got a smell like soaked dirt and pennies. The crawl space beneath the cabin was shallow, maybe 3 feet high at the deepest point. Plastic sheeting sagged over patches of mud. There were cinder blocks, old cans, a coil of hose, and darkness packed tight between the supports. My phone flashlight reached only so far. I called hello, because apparently I wanted to feel stupid twice in one day. Nothing answered. I shut the panel and told myself I was spooking myself with family junk and rain noises. I even said I'd leave before dark and get dinner in Cookville. Problem solved. Then the first knock came from under the kitchen floor. 3 quick taps. I froze with a stack of magazines in my hand. A second set of taps answered from beneath the bedroom. Not loud, not aggressive, just distinct enough that I could map them under the boards. I remember setting the magazines down carefully, like if I moved too suddenly I'd confirm something I didn't want confirmed. I walked through the cabin, listening. The rain had eased. The lake beyond the trees looked flat and gray through the windows. Everything seemed ordinary except for the fact that something was knocking from inside the ground under me. I convinced myself it had to be branches or pipes or some weird echo. Cabins amplify things. Hollow spaces do strange work with sound. The explanation felt thin even while I assembled it. When I went into the back bedroom, the twin mattress had shifted, only a little. 6 inches maybe, far enough that the dust outline beneath it no longer matched. That's the kind of detail that strips away your excuses. I left the cabin then, fast but not quite running. I got to my car, opened the passenger door, and realized my keys were still on the kitchen counter. That little pause in the driveway, rain dripping from the branches, my own breathing too fast, trying to decide if I was overreacting, is one of the moments I replay most. Because part of me knew, part of me did, but there's pride in ordinary life. Pride makes you go back for keys. I went back in. The cabin door stood open wider than I'd left it. The inside looked dimmer. I took 2 steps toward the kitchen and heard a dragging sound under the floor, moving parallel to me, not random, keeping pace. I stopped. It stopped. I walked again. It moved again beneath the boards, slow and deliberate, following the length of the room. My mouth went dry so fast it hurt. I could feel each beat of my pulse in my neck. I said no to no one, maybe to myself, and started toward the counter. Halfway there, the floorboard near the sink flexed upward. Just once, something underneath pressed it from below and released. I snatched the keys and backed away. That's when I heard breathing from the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Not loud, wet and patient. I should have left immediately. Instead, I turned because people always turn. That's the ugly truth. We look. At the far end of the hall, low to the ground, something pale was easing itself out from under the twin bed, not crawling, unfolding. A shoulder came first, slick with damp soil. Then an arm too long for the space, elbow bending wrong as it planted a hand on the floorboards. The fingers were gray with mud except for the nails, which looked clean and colorless. Its head stayed hidden under the bed frame for a second while the rest of the body kept coming, like it had more joints than it needed. Then the face slid into view upside down. That is the part I would remove from memory if I could. It looked at me from beneath its own body, chin angled up, forehead brushing the floor, eyes open and steady, while the rest of it remained twisted in the process of emerging. Its mouth was packed with dirt, not smeared, packed as if it had been chewing mud and hadn't swallowed yet. I ran. I slammed the front door behind me and heard it hit the other side almost at once, not with a body impact, but with quick little tapping movements all over the wood, like fingernails testing for seams. I made it to the car, dropped the keys twice, got in, locked the doors, and looked up just in time to see the crawlspace access door hanging open again. Something moved under the cabin from one side to the other, visible through the gaps between the blocks. Too fast to track, but low and smooth. The engine started, thank God, and I backed down the drive spraying gravel. When I hit the main park road, I didn't slow until I saw other cars, real people, a fisherman in a rain jacket loading a cooler, a woman walking a dog near the marina. The world snapped back so hard it made me shaky. I told the park office I'd found structural damage and an animal problem under the leasehold cabin. That was as close to the truth as I could manage. A maintenance worker called me later that evening. He said they checked the place and found the crawlspace access open, but no animals. He sounded mildly annoyed, like I'd made him crawl around in the mud for nothing. Then he asked if I'd moved the photographs. I said no. He said they were all spread out under the cabin on the plastic sheeting. I still have the one with the person in the crawlspace. After I got home, I looked at it again under brighter light. There's a second figure farther back in the dark that I missed the first time, just a hand around one of the piers. I never told my mother that part. I just said there wasn't much worth keeping from the cabin, which is true, I guess. If a place can keep a shape of you after you leave, maybe it doesn't belong to your family anymore. Story 4. Big Ridge State Park feels older than it is. I don't mean historically, I mean emotionally. The woods around those ridges and little inlets have this settled, watchful quality, like the land got used to people coming and going and decided not to care. My wife used to love it there because the water stayed still in the mornings and the trails were easy enough for lazy weekends. After the divorce, I kept going back by myself in a way that probably wasn't healthy. Certain places become habits when your life loses its shape. The story happened on a weekday in May. I know that because school was still in session and the campground looked half empty. I'd driven up after lunch with a cooler of sodas, a paperback I never opened, one clean t-shirt, and a bag of charcoal I forgot to use. My campsite sat near the lake but backed into woods thick with understory. There were frogs making a racket in the shallows, and every picnic table had that dusting of yellow pollen that makes everything look vaguely old. I was not there to seek out anything spooky. I was there because being home alone had started feeling louder than being outside. Around sunset, I took a walk down a side trail I didn't remember from previous trips. It curved around a cove, past an old stone chimney standing by itself in the trees, and ended near a stretch of water so still it looked lacquered. There was trash here and there, beer caps, a worm container, one child's flip-flop half buried in sand. Normal signs that people had existed there before me. There was also a swing hanging from an oak branch over the bank, just a wooden board and 2 ropes. Weathered but usable. I stood there longer than I should have, looking at it. No reason, I just didn't remember it from before. On the walk back, I noticed a woman about 30 yards ahead on the trail, dark hair, light jacket, moving at the same steady pace I was. I hadn't heard anyone in front of me, which struck me as odd but not impossible. Trails bend. Sound gets swallowed. I almost called out some polite thing like evening, but something about the way she moved stopped me. Her arms barely swung. Her head stayed level. It looked less like walking than gliding over a treadmill. I told myself I was being dramatic. By the time I reached camp, she was nowhere in sight. That should have been it. If I had any sense, that should have been it. Instead, I made dinner, drank 2 sodas too fast, and sat at the picnic table watching the tree line darken. A family somewhere down the loop let their kids stay up later than they should have, and I could hear them arguing over marshmallows. A generator hummed from an RV farther off. Safe sounds, domestic sounds. Then I heard the swing creak, slow, rhythmic. The trail to the cove was maybe 100 yards from my sight, close enough that I could imagine the sound carrying if the wind happened right. I told myself that had to be all it was, wind on old rope. It kept going for 10 solid minutes. Eventually I got irritated, which in hindsight was fear dressing itself up as annoyance. I took my flashlight and walked back down there. The trail looked ordinary in the beam. Roots, leaf litter, the white flashes of fungus on rotten wood. The cove opened in front of me, black and silver under the moon. The swing was moving, not much, just enough to make that little complaint of rope against branch. No wind at all. The board tilted forward, then back, forward, then back. I shone the flashlight on it and the movement stopped instantly. I remember laughing once under my breath because the alternative was bolting like a child. I walked closer. The ropes looked new near the top where they looped over the branch, but old lower down. That made no sense and I tried not to think about it. Then the light found footprints in the mud by the bank, small, bare, and wet. They led from the water to the swing. None led away. I don't know why that's worse than any other impossible thing, but it is. I backed up a step. The beam shook in my hand. That's when a woman's voice behind me said, very near my right ear, "Don't sit in it." I jerked so hard I nearly fell. Nobody there. The voice wasn't loud, more like someone leaning in to share a private warning. I spun in a full circle, sweeping the light over trees, water, bank, nothing. Then I caught movement across the cove just beyond the reach of the beam, a figure standing calf-deep in the lake, woman-shaped. Same light jacket I'd seen on the trail, still as a signpost. I yelled, "Are you okay?" Which was such a stupid sentence for that moment. I still hate myself a little for it, but you reach for ordinary language first. You always do. The figure lifted one arm and pointed not at me but toward the swing. Then her head turned too far, not all at once. Slowly, steadily, until the face was no longer lined up with the shoulders. I felt my stomach drop in a real physical way, like missing a stair in the dark. I backed away again and the flashlight beam skipped over the swing seat. There was a child sitting on it. I had been looking right at it seconds earlier. The seat had been empty. The child wore a striped shirt and dark shorts. Wet hair clung to the forehead. The feet hung above the mud, not touching. I couldn't see the face because the head was bowed. I took one step back. The child took one swing forward. The woman in the water lowered her arm. Somewhere in the trees to my left, another child laughed once. Short, breathy, not happy. I ran before anything else could happen. That was my contribution. No strategy, no courage. I just turned and ran for the campground with branches slapping my shoulders. Halfway there I realized I could still hear the swing creaking behind me, the same slow rhythm, keeping pace far longer than it should have. At camp, the family noises were gone. The whole loop had gone quiet. Every camper seemed zipped into tents or inside RVs. My own sight looked small and foolish under the lantern glow. I locked myself in the truck. I know how that sounds. Grown man hiding in a pickup because of a swing, but something in me had decided the tent was unacceptable. I turned on the interior light, then immediately turned it off because it made the outside windows black mirrors. For a while nothing happened. Then, around midnight maybe, I saw someone walking through the campground. A woman in a light jacket, head level, arms nearly still. She moved from site to site, not entering them, just pausing at the edge of each pool of darkness as if checking who was there. When she reached mine, she stopped beside the picnic table and looked directly at the truck. I couldn't make out her face through the glass. Then a second shape stepped out from behind her. Small, child-sized, then a third, not a family, not walking together. Just emerging one at a time from angles that didn't line up with the path, all wet and calm, standing around my campsite as if they belonged there and I didn't. The woman raised one hand and tapped her own chest twice. One of the children climbed onto the picnic table and squatted there. Another crouched beneath it. The last one walked to the tent, placed both hands on the fabric and pushed. The tent folded inward with no resistance. I started the truck. That was the plan. Leave immediately. The engine turned over but didn't catch. Again. Outside, all four heads turned toward me at once. The child by the tent began to laugh in that same breathy little way. The woman stepped closer into the spill of moonlight, and I saw her face clearly for the first and only time. Her skin looked water-swollen, stretched slick over the features, and her mouth hung slightly open as if she'd forgotten what expression belonged there. One eye was clouded. The other looked ordinary, which made it worse. Then the child on the table opened its mouth too wide, and a stream of lake water poured out over the wood. That was my moment, the one that still returns first. The truck finally caught. I threw it into gear and tore out so fast I clipped the edge of the fire ring. In the rearview mirror, I saw the woman and the children remain exactly where they were, not chasing, not hurrying, just standing in my abandoned campsite while the collapsed tent twitched under small movements I couldn't explain. I drove to the ranger station lot and stayed there till sunrise with the doors locked. When I went back later with daylight and people moving around, the campsite looked normal except for one thing. My tent had been set upright again. The poles were snapped, but it had been arranged into the shape of standing. Inside, the sleeping bag was soaked through with lake water. I hadn't even unrolled it before leaving. I stopped going to Big Ridge after that, which felt like losing a place twice. Sometimes I think about the voice telling me not to sit in the swing. I don't know if that was help or just another way of being noticed. I'm not sure which possibility I dislike more. Story 5. Pickett CCC Memorial State Park sits in the kind of darkness people from cities don't really believe in until they stand inside it. They market the stargazing there, and fair enough, the sky is incredible, But what they don't put on the brochures is how small that same darkness makes you feel once you step away from the lodge lights. Not haunted small, just unimportant. Like if you disappeared among those rock formations and pines, the night wouldn't need to rearrange itself around your absence. I was there for work, of all things. I do field audio for small documentaries and educational projects, nothing glamorous, mostly nature clips, interviews, location, ambience. A producer named Salma DuPont had me out there to gather clean nighttime sound for a short film about Tennessee's dark sky sights. Crickets, wind, owls, distant water, that kind of thing. It was supposed to be easy money. One night, 2 mics, a parabolic dish, and a thermos full of coffee bad enough to strip paint. I checked into a cabin, spent the afternoon scouting spots, and kept notes in a little green notebook I can't find anymore. I remember nonsense details with embarrassing clarity. One of my batteries had a strip of blue tape peeling off it. I ate peanuts for dinner because I couldn't be bothered to drive back for food. There was a moth in the bathroom sink that looked like a curled piece of ash. My right headphone ear pad had split and kept catching on my hair. Around 10, I hiked out to a boulder field I'd marked earlier near one of the quieter trails. It wasn't remote, but far enough that the campground noise disappeared. The rocks rose out of the trees in stacked shapes, black against a sky so bright with stars it almost hurt to look at. I set one recorder near a split in the stones and another under a scrub pine, then sat on a flat rock sipping burnt coffee and trying not to think about how cold it had gotten. The first odd thing in the audio was a voice saying, "Closer." I didn't hear it live. I heard it on playback through headphones 10 minutes later when I checked levels. Very faint. Could have been wind through a crack, I thought. Could have been someone on a distant trail. The word shape was there, but hearing language in noise is easy when your brain wants patterns. So I moved one of the mics closer to the rocks. That part still bothers me. The idea that I might have obeyed before understanding I was obeying. A little after 11, the woods went so quiet I took my headphones off just to confirm the recorder hadn't died. Then I heard a tapping sound from inside the boulder split. Not random rock settling. A deliberate little tick-tick, pause, tick, like nails on ceramic. I knelt and shone my flashlight into the gap. It widened deeper than I expected, dropping into a narrow crevice cluttered with leaves and old branches. Nothing reflected back. No animal eyes, no movement. I told myself it was a raccoon or a drip-hitting stone or anything that lives in the reasonable world. The tapping came again from farther down in the crack. I backed off. Settled down, I thought. You're alone, cold, undercaffeinated, and sitting in a black field of rocks like a genius. Then my recorder near the pine went dead, just cut out. I crossed to restart it and found the tripod laid carefully on its side, not knocked over, laid down. The recorder itself was still rolling, but the gain dial had been turned all the way up. I hadn't touched it. I am picky about levels to the point of annoyance. I know where I leave my gear. I looked around, finally admitting I felt watched. Not by something moving between trees, by something holding still nearby and letting me know it knew exactly where I was. I packed the pine recorder first. I should have packed both and left. Instead, I kept glancing at the boulder split because the quiet around it felt personal. That's the best word I have, personal. Then I heard my producer's voice from inside the rocks. Salma said in the same brisk tone she used on shoots, "Can you get one more take?" I almost answered. That's the shameful part. It sounded right enough to reach the habit before the fear. Then I remembered she was in Nashville and that her voice should not have been coming from underground in Fentress County. I grabbed the second recorder and stepped back from the crevice. "Closer," it said again, but this time the word came in my own voice. That's when I finally understood I needed to leave. I slung the bag over one shoulder and headed for the trail, moving too fast for the dark and catching my boots on roots. Behind me, from several different spaces between the rocks, came a soft rustling like people shifting in cramped seats. I didn't turn around. I kept walking until the beam of my flashlight skimmed across a stone face and showed me something pale clinging there. At first I thought it was tree bark blown onto the rock. Then it moved. A hand, no, not a hand, something hand-shaped, was spread flat against the stone at shoulder height. The fingers were too many at first glance, then maybe not. My mind still won't settle on that. What I know is that each digit ended in a smooth, blunt tip, no nail, no claw, like candle wax pressed into shape. An arm extended back into a narrow crack far too small to hold a body. Another hand appeared on the rock above it. Then, very slowly, a face leaned out sideways from the gap between two stones, as if the crack were a curtain and it had only as much room as the width of its skull. The face was pale and flat, ears plastered tight to the head, eyes dark and set too far apart. But the worst part was the expression, not threatening, curious, like I was the one making unusual noises in its home. Then a second face emerged from a different crack 6 feet to the left. Then a third below my knee level, not one thing, several, all of them watching without blinking. I made a sound I don't remember making and started downhill off trail. I knew it was a bad idea immediately because the rock field broke under my feet, and I nearly twisted an ankle. Behind me came that dry tapping from multiple directions, rocks answering one another. Not running after me, communicating maybe, I don't know. I started to think I understood it, and then I realized I didn't. I scrambled through laurel and around a low bluff, using the distant cabin lights as a target. Twice I heard my own voice somewhere behind me saying, "This way," and once ahead of me saying, "Almost there." I ignored all of it and kept angling toward the only fixed glow I could see. There was a split-rail fence near the cabin loop. The moment I crossed it, the sound stopped. Not faded, stopped. I turned then because I was back within sight of porch lights and human architecture and all the small lies that make us brave. The woods beyond the fence looked ordinary except for one boulder at the edge of the trees. On top of it sat my parabolic microphone dish. I had left that back in the rock field. It balanced there upright like a white moon facing the cabins. I did not go retrieve it that night. The next morning I went with a park employee named Greta Salcido, who assumed I'd misplaced gear in the dark. We found the dish by the fence exactly where I'd seen it. She laughed and said raccoons were unionizing. I laughed too because it was available. Back in the cabin, I checked the audio files. Most were normal ambience. Wind, insects, a barred owl. But on the recorder, whose gain had been turned up, there was a section of sound I can't quite listen to straight through anymore. Under the hiss and overdriven static, you can hear small tapping patterns answering each other. And once, clear as a person leaning into a microphone, my own voice says, "There are more spaces than you think." I delivered the usable nature audio and told Salma one recorder glitched. Professionally, that was true. I still work nights sometimes, but I don't put microphones near cracks in stone anymore. And if a voice in the dark sounds familiar, that doesn't comfort me the way it used to. Story 6. Radnor Lake isn't the kind of place people expect horror stories from. It sits right up against Nashville like a patch of preserved calm, all water and trails and birdwatchers and people in expensive walking shoes trying to feel outdoorsy before brunch. I used to go there on weekday mornings when I could sneak away from grad school work. It was close, easy, and quiet in a curated kind of way. That sounds dismissive, but I loved it for that. You could step into the woods without surrendering the sense that the city still existed nearby. The morning this happened was heavy and warm, late summer maybe. August. I had a migraine the day before and still felt wrung out from it. My backpack had a field guide I never opened, half a sleeve of crackers, a pen with no cap, and a notebook full of statistics I was supposed to be reviewing for a methods exam. I wore the wrong socks for the humidity and felt them bunching under my arch within the first mile. There were dragonflies over the water and one older man taking photos with a lens the size of a thermos. I took a less traveled spur near the lake edge because the main path was busier than I wanted. Not off limits, just thinner, less maintained. The kind of trail where the roots show and the undergrowth starts pretending it has authority. I remember passing a deer standing almost in the trail, a doe with one ear torn at the tip. She watched me with no urgency at all, which struck me as odd. Usually they flinch off. About 20 minutes in, I heard someone behind me matching my pace. Not close, far enough that I never saw them when I glanced back. But every time I stepped over roots or brushed through brush, a second set of sounds answered a beat later. Another hiker made sense. The path was public. I even slowed once to let them catch up and pass. The following steps slowed too. That was the first moment my body noticed before my mind did. I got that tightening low in my stomach, not full fear yet, just alertness. I stepped off to retie my shoe and waited. No one came around the bend. I told myself the person behind me had stopped too. Maybe checking a map, maybe tying their own shoe. People mirror each other unconsciously on trails. Then I heard a twig snap directly to my left in the trees, well off the path. When I looked, nothing moved. By then I should have turned around, but stubbornness is its own kind of blindness. I hate abandoning a walk because of a feeling. So I kept going toward one of the quieter overlooks, telling myself I'd sit there a minute, drink water, and reset. The trail narrowed and dipped into a stretch where the air smelled green and stagnant, like wet leaves left too long in a bucket. That's where I found the hare. Caught on a low branch beside the path was a braid of black human hair tied off at one end with blue sewing thread, not a wig piece. Real hair, thick and dull, with one little silver bead threaded near the tie. It hung at eye level and barely moved. I stared at it, and my brain tried very hard to offer me normal explanations. Some craft project, some memorial thing, something dropped by accident and snagged. But no, not a whole braid, not tied off like that, not at eye level on a branch that looked selected. I didn't touch it. I walked around it and kept going because turning my back on it felt worse somehow. A few minutes later, I heard my own voice ahead on the trail say, "You left your notebook." Not exactly my voice, close enough to turn my knees watery. I stopped dead. My notebook was in the side pocket of my bag. I could feel the spiral edge bumping my elbow. The voice ahead said, lighter this time, "Come get it." I backed up one step. A second voice behind me, also mine, said, "Wrong way." It's hard to describe the panic of hearing yourself from two directions at once. Not fear of being attacked exactly, more like the world had found a loophole in you. I stepped off the trail into a patch of ferns and crouched. My thinking at that point was not elegant. Just get out of sight, figure out where actual people are, then move. I could hear my pulse in my ears. Sweat ran down the side of my face into my collar. The footsteps started again on the trail. Only one set now. They came from ahead and passed slowly by my hiding place without pausing. Through the stems I saw bare ankles, then calves, then the hem of a mud-stained park volunteer skirt, the kind some interpreters wear at historic sites, except there was no historic site anywhere near that trail. The figure moved with a slight limp. I waited for a face and didn't get one because when the upper body came into view, the torso was turned the wrong direction. The chest faced forward, but the head and arms angled backward as if the whole top half had been twisted around on the spine and then taught to keep walking anyway. I bit my hand to keep from making a sound. The figure stopped 10 feet past me. In my own voice from that backward-facing head, it said, "Found you." I ran downhill through brush so thick it tore my forearms. I didn't aim for the trail. I aimed for water because I could hear it through the trees and because water meant openness. Behind me, movement followed in short bursts, not crashing pursuit, more like quick relocations. One place, then another, then suddenly close. Several times it called in voices that shifted mid-sentence, mine, then a stranger's, then a little girl's, then mine again. I reached the lake edge at a muddy little cutout between reeds. No beach, just slick bank dropping into dark water. I turned because there was nowhere else to go. It stood 20 feet away among the cattails. From a distance, the body looked female, slight and average height. Up close, it was a patchwork of almosts. My face sat on it badly, stretched across bones that didn't match, the expression lagging behind the movement. One of my eyebrows was higher than the other, except it wasn't my skin, not really, just a likeness pulled too thin. Beneath the jaw, another mouth moved under the surface of the throat like something trapped in fabric. That detail made me step backward into the water. The thing smiled with my teeth and said, "You can go where I go." Then it bent at the waist, and instead of stopping at a human angle, it kept folding until the hands touched mud, then lower, then the back arched the wrong way, and it started toward me on all fours, face still turned upright toward mine. I don't remember deciding to fight. I picked up a branch floating at the shoreline and swung when it got close. I hit the side of its head, or what should have been the side, and the sound was hollow, like striking wet reeds bundled together. It recoiled, not in pain but in surprise, and that gave me enough time to scramble along the bank toward the main trail. I burst out near a viewing area where a birding group was gathered with binoculars. Real people. Hats, water bottles, sunscreen, all of it. I must have looked deranged, soaked to the knees and scratched up. An older woman asked if I was all right, and I heard myself say "Copperhead" because it was the fastest lie available. Nobody behind me, nothing in the reeds except wind. I sat in my car shaking for 20 minutes before I could drive. At home, I emptied my bag and found the notebook wasn't there. I thought maybe I had dropped it during the run. That would have been upsetting but normal. Then I noticed something jammed in the spiral binding of a different pad in the front pocket. The silver bead from the braid on the branch, threaded onto one of my own hairs and tied off with blue sewing thread. I never went back to look for the notebook. I failed that exam for unrelated reasons, or maybe not unrelated. I couldn't hear my own recorded voice for months without needing to turn it off. Even now, if somebody calls my name on a trail and I can't see their face immediately, every muscle in me wants open ground and witnesses. Story 7. Cumberland Mountain State Park was where my father taught me how to pitch a tent. Nothing dramatic, just one of those quiet family traditions that gets lodged in your body. He was patient in the irritating way some decent men are, never raised his voice, just waited while you figured out what you'd done wrong. After he died, I avoided the park for years because I couldn't separate the place from him. Then my daughter turned 10 and asked if we could camp, where Grandpa used to go. Her name is Nora Bell. I'm telling you that because she matters here in a way I still can't fully stand to examine. We went in early June, just one night. Easy campground, close to facilities, nothing remote. I overpacked the way anxious parents do. Wet wipes, extra batteries, way too many snacks, a fleece blanket she absolutely did not need in June, a stuffed rabbit she swore she was too old to want and then immediately slept with. She spent the drive kicking the back of my seat lightly in rhythm with whatever song was stuck in her head. At the site, she became obsessed with collecting perfect sticks, which turned out to mean any stick longer than her forearm. It was good. It really was. We roasted hot dogs. She spilled orange soda on one camp chair and got upset about it until I showed her how sticky everything at campsites becomes sooner or later. We walked down by Bayard Lake and looked at turtles on a log. I remember her asking if fish sleep, and me realizing I had no idea how to answer at the level of detail a 10-year-old considers satisfactory. The first odd thing happened after dark when we were brushing teeth at the restroom building. A little boy's voice from one of the empty stalls said, "Is your dad asleep yet?" Nora looked at me in the mirror. I said, "Occupied." walked toward the stall, assuming another family was in there quietly and maybe a kid had the wrong setup in his head. No answer. I checked. Empty stalls, dry floors, no feet under any doors. I told Nora someone outside must have called in through the window. She accepted that because children are mercifully good at borrowing your explanations when they need them. Back at the tent, the campground had settled into its usual night sounds: zippers, low conversation, a dog barking once and being hushed. Our tent was on the edge of the loop nearest the tree line. Not isolated, but close enough to woods that you couldn't quite see where trunks ended and dark began. Nora fell asleep quickly. I stayed up outside a little longer in the camp chair, remembering my father and feeling that ache people politely call bittersweet. Then from the woods came his voice, very soft. "Marlon." That's my name. I hadn't heard him say it in 12 years. I went cold in a way that felt internal, like somebody had filled my chest with sink water. Now grief does strange things. Memory does stranger. I know that, so my mind lunged for explanations. A man with a similar voice, some weird acoustic trick, my own thoughts arriving louder than usual in the dark. I sat there gripping the chair arms, waiting to see if it would happen again. It did, closer this time. "Marlon, come help me." My father had used that exact tone when he wanted me to carry something heavy as a teenager. Mildly amused, as if my help were assumed. I went to the tent and zipped myself inside instead. Not brave maybe, but right. An hour might have passed, maybe less. I was hovering in that miserable half-sleep parents get outdoors, one ear always pointed at their kid when Nora whispered, "Dad." I said, "Yeah." She said, "There's somebody unzipping the little door." The little door was the mesh vent panel near our feet. I sat up so fast my neck popped. The vent zipper moved another inch, not from the outside tab, from inside the seam, as if small fingers were finding purchase where there shouldn't be any. I lunged and grabbed the zipper pull. On the other side of the mesh, inches from my hand, something small and pale pressed close, child-sized face, smooth skin, no features at all except the mouth. It had my daughter's mouth, same little chip in the front tooth, same shape. It smiled through the mesh. I shouted and slammed my palm against the panel. The face vanished sideways so fast it seemed poured away rather than moved. Nora started crying, asking what it was, and I lied instantly. I said raccoon. I said stupid campsite raccoon. My voice shook so badly the lie probably sounded worse than the truth. I got her shoes on, didn't bother with mine, scooped her up with the stuffed rabbit under one arm and made for the truck. Halfway there I heard children laughing in the woods, not a whole crowd, 3 or 4 maybe, enough to place them at different points among the trees. My father's voice said from the dark, "Don't teach her the knots wrong." That sentence almost stopped me. It was so specific, so him, my breathing actually hitched. Then Nora said into my shoulder, "Dad, why is that girl wearing my pajamas?" I looked. At the edge of our campsite, where the firelight barely reached, stood a small figure in pink pajamas patterned with faded moons. Nora's old pair from last year, the ones we still had at home in a donation bag in the hall closet. The figure's face was blank except for my father's eyes. Not his whole face, just the eyes set too far apart in that smooth child head looking tired and kind and terribly wrong. That image gets me still, not because it was grotesque, because it was intimate. I got Nora into the truck and locked the doors. She was sobbing by then, asking if that was a prank, if someone was doing masks. I told her yes. Yes, some mean person, and we were leaving. I tried to start the truck and got nothing, not even a turnover, dead silence. I had driven it there that afternoon with no issues. Outside, small shapes moved just beyond the headlights. Every few seconds one would step forward enough to show a piece of borrowed familiarity. A hand with my ex-wife's wedding ring, my daughter's rabbit held by the ears, my father's walk, my own jacket from the shoulders down. none of them matched all over. That's what made it unbearable. As if they were building people from memory and getting impatient with the details. One came close enough to place both hands on the hood. A child body, my mother's face except younger, mouth open too wide showing a row of tiny adult teeth. I hit the horn, long furious blast. Lights came on in nearby campers, a door slammed somewhere. Real human voices rose, annoyed and sleepy. And all those little figures dropped flat at once, not crouched, flat, as if strings had been cut. Then they slid backward into the grass toward the woods without lifting. The truck started on the next try. I drove straight to the front lot near the lodge and spent the rest of the night there with Nora asleep across the seat, Rabbit clutched under her chin. In the morning, I went back with a ranger. I said something had been around our campsite messing with gear. I didn't say what shape it wore. The tent had been opened neatly. Inside, every knot I had tied the evening before had been retied in my father's style. The old method he used to show me, with the bitter end tucked back through. I hadn't tied them that way since I was about 13. Nora doesn't remember much now, or says she doesn't. She remembers a mean costume girl and the truck horn and waking up in the parking lot. I've let it stay that way. But she asked me once, a year later, why Grandpa had sounded angry in the woods that night. I told her she was dreaming. Maybe she was, maybe that's the kinder version. I still camp with her, but never near a tree line, and never where children's voices can hide just beyond the fire. Story 8. Roan Mountain is so beautiful it almost feels rude. That open bald, the wind whipping across grass, the sudden long views when the fog pulls back. It's the kind of place that makes people reach for bigger, prettier language than they normally use. I won't do that. Pretty isn't the whole truth of it anyway. Up there, weather changes its mind fast, distances play tricks, and once you get beyond the comfortable crowd areas, the mountain has a way of making your own judgment feel second-hand. I was there in September with a friend named Tessa Quill. She was doing watercolor studies for a local arts program and wanted reference photos from the less touristy side trails. I came along because I hike, because she didn't like going alone, and because I'd been in one of those low moods where helping someone else structure a day keeps you from sinking into your own head. We left early, bought gas station biscuits in Johnson City, and spent the drive arguing about whether clouds count as weather if they never rain. By noon, the mountain had gone in and out of fog 3 times. We parked near an overlook and took a trail skirting the bulge toward a quieter patch of spruce fir. Tessa carried watercolors, 2 apples, and a scarf she insisted made her look like a serious landscape person. I carried the heavier pack, a first aid kit, sunscreen we both forgot to reapply, and a cheap pair of binoculars with one lens slightly loose. The trail started lovely and open, bees in late wildflowers, wind flattening the grass in shimmering strokes. A couple with trekking poles passed us and mentioned storms may be rolling through later. Nothing ominous, just mountain talk. Then we came to a section where the path dipped into a stand of firs and lost the sky. The temperature dropped immediately. The air smelled resinous and damp, and the ground turned springy with old needles. Tessa stopped to photograph a stump covered in mushrooms that looked like stacked ears. I sat on a rock and ate half an apple while she fussed with angles. That's when I noticed the bells, very faint, not church bells. Small bells like the ones people put on pet collars or fishing lines. They jingled once from deeper in the trees and then stopped. Tessa heard them too and said maybe somebody had horses on a lower trail. I said maybe a dog. Neither explanation fit the sound exactly, but both were close enough that we used them. A little farther in, we found strips of cloth tied to branches at shoulder height, not trail markers, different fabrics, checked shirt material, lace, denim, what looked like part of a child's yellow raincoat sleeve. Faded, damp, tied in simple knots. Tessa thought it might be some kind of art thing. I thought it might be someone marking a route. Both explanations felt flimsy. The knots were too deliberate, too evenly spaced, and there were no footprints off-trail that we could see. We should have turned back then. Instead, Tessa said, "Let's just go a little farther and see where they stop." That sentence could be carved on the grave of half the bad decisions I've made. The cloth strips led us to a clearing I'm still not sure should have been there. Small, round, almost perfectly ringed by fir trunks. The ground inside was bare except for a scatter of white stones arranged in spirals. In the center stood a dead sapling hung with dozens of little bells made from bottle caps, nutshells, bent spoons, tabs from drink cans, anything that could clink if wind touched it. Only there was no wind inside the clearing. The bells moved anyway, not all at once. One here, then another, then three in a line as if something invisible were circling the sapling and plucking them. Tessa raised her camera. I said, "Maybe don't." She lowered it, which was the last clean decision either of us made. From the trees beyond the clearing came my voice saying, "Tess, come look at this." I was standing 3 feet from her when it happened. She turned toward the sound before she processed it. You couldn't help it. Hearing someone you know from the wrong place drags your attention like a hook. Then my voice came again from another side of the clearing, softer. "I found the trail." I said, very carefully, "That isn't me." The bells around the sapling all gave one tiny synchronized shake. Then Tessa's voice answered from the dark between the trees. "I know." We stood back to back after that, which sounds cinematic but was really just primitive. She grabbed my sleeve so hard she tore a button loose. The clearing had gone dead still except for the occasional bell twitching somewhere we weren't looking. Then I saw movement high in the firs, not climbing, perched. Something long-limbed crouched along a branch 30 feet up, wrapped in strips of cloth that matched the tide markers. Denim at one shoulder, yellow slick material around one arm, pale lace trailing from the throat. At first, I thought it was tangled trash in the shape of a body. Then it leaned forward and I saw the head. No face. Just a smooth oval covered in stretched pale skin with shallow indentations where features might once have been pressed from underneath. The cloth strips fluttered lightly around it though the air remained still. A line of small bells hung from one wrist. It tilted its head toward us. Every tide strip on the branches around the clearing twitched in answer. Tessa whispered, "Run." I said, "Not yet," because I didn't know where the trail had gone. The path we came in on no longer looked right. 2 gaps between the trees now seemed equally worn, though I could have sworn there had only been one. That's the part that unnerves me even in retrospect, the geometry loosening, directions becoming negotiable. The thing in the tree shook its wrist once. A bell chimed near my left ear. I flinched and turned. There, hanging from a branch inches from my face, was a strip of red flannel I recognized instantly. My own shirt. The one I'd ripped while helping my brother move a couch 2 winters earlier and cut into rags for the garage. I had never brought that shirt anywhere near Roan Mountain. Tessa made a sound beside me, half gasp, half sob. Hanging in front of her was the scarf she'd been wearing that morning, except it was still around her neck too. Same pattern, same coffee stain near one end. That broke us. We ran, not together for long. The trees and fog split us within seconds. I heard her crashing somewhere to my right and kept shouting her name, but the mountain answered in my voice from ahead, behind, above. Bells rang in short, teasing bursts. Once I looked up and saw cloth strips hanging from branches that hadn't had them a second before. I forced myself downhill because downhill at least is a fact. The ground slickened under my boots. I slid, caught a trunk, kept moving. Twice I nearly followed openings in the trees that looked like trail, and then realized there were no prints, no erosion, nothing, just suggestion. The thing stayed mostly above me. I'd hear a branch take weight, glimpse pale cloth through fir needles, then lose it again. Only once did I get a full view. I burst into a narrow opening between rocks and looked up to find it stretched across 2 trunks overhead, body wrapped in all those stolen scraps, head hanging upside down between its arms. Where a face should have been, the smooth skin bulged outward in shifting shapes as if features were trying on the inside to choose themselves. My own nose pressed briefly from beneath, Tessa's mouth, an old man's closed eye, then all of it flattened again. That is the image I still see when I hear little bells. It dropped one arm toward me. The hand wasn't a hand at all, just cloth tightened around too many narrow joints. Bells hanging from it touched my shoulder. I scolded. I shoved through a stand of young spruce and practically fell onto the actual trail, the maintained one, where 2 hikers in bright jackets were coming uphill. Real people, trekking poles, sweating, mildly irritated to find a stranger stumbling out of the brush looking wild-eyed. I turned back immediately, yelling for Tessa. No bells, no cloth, just trees and fog. We found her 20 minutes later with a search team from the nearest trailhead. She had somehow looped uphill instead of down and ended up sitting beside a trail sign, shaky and pale but unhurt except for scrapes. She said she'd followed me the whole time. I told her that was impossible.